Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karava Vahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Chaiva Tato Jayamudirayeta. Very good. Welcome back. We are in the midst of a dialogue between Yudhishthira, who is in the forest, with the great Rishi Markandeya. And Markandeya has been explaining something to Yudhishthira about the doctrine of karma. We want to review what we've seen in the last couple of classes, and then we'll come to the closing part of this chapter. This review, I think, would be very helpful to get some clarity about what is kind of a little complicated topic. Not that complicated, but worth the review. Let me go to the board, because we want to talk about how karma unfolds in our lives. And in our discussion, we've discussed how each and every one of us have had an infinite number of prior lives. And I'm just going to summarize everything, and I'll go fairly quickly because you've seen this in prior classes. Each and every one of us have had an infinite number of prior lives. In an infinite number of prior lives, you have accumulated an infinite amount of karma. The accumulation of infinite karma is called Sanchita karma. And it is an infinite accumulation based on an infinite number of prior lives. Infinite accumulation means it's going to be an infinite amount of punya and an infinite amount of papa. This is called Sanchita karma, accumulated karma. And then we understand that this life cannot possibly be the result of an infinite amount of punya and papa karmas. This life, how long would you have to live to exhaust an infinite number of punya and papa karmas? You'd have to have an infinitely long life. This life is finite. Therefore, this life is due to a finite amount of karma. That finite amount of karma is like, to use mathematical terms, a subset, a portion of the Sanchita karma. A portion becomes your prarabdha karma. Prarabdha karma is the karma that's responsible for this life. It's finite. A finite amount, enough to keep us going mostly for 70 or 80 years. That finite amount of prarabdha karma is like a subset, a portion of this prarabdha karma. That prarabdha karma is also punya and papa. For human lives, for most of us, it's more or less 50% punya and 50% papa. It can be somewhat more punya, somewhat less papa, or the other way around, depending on a particular life. We also discussed how if your prarabdha karma is 0% punya and 100% papa, pretty bad news. That's what we consider a life in hell. Notice our definition of hell, then, is not a place. Our definition of hell is a life in which you have only papa karmas. Similarly, if we reverse it, our definition of heaven, svarga, is not a place. Our definition of svarga is a life in which you have 100% punya, 0% papa. One thing we know, though, is that it's not possible to have 100% punya or 100% papa here in this place. So we know that in this life is neither heaven nor hell, something in between. This is our worldly life. Now, in this life, we are exhausting the results of our past actions, but simultaneously we are committing new karmas all the time. Are we not? In this life, from childhood on, we're committing new karmas. Those new karmas are called agami. They're also called kriyamana, but we'll just stay with one word, agami karmas. These are the karmas you do in this life. And if you do lots and lots of punya karmas, it's going to shift this ratio in your favor. If you do lots and lots of papa karmas, it's going to shift this ratio in a negative direction. But anyway, there's some amount of both punya and papa karmas that you commit in this life. Then, this life goes on, as we said, for 70 or 80 years, determined by your prarabdha karma. When your prarabdha karmas are exhausted, this life comes to an end. Now, this is a little bit tricky now. Watch. The agami karmas you commit in this life, some of those agami karmas will fructify in this life. There's no rule that says that your karma is only going to fructify in future lives. There's no rule. So a portion of this agami karma can fructify in this life, but at the end of this life, a portion remains. I've drawn a line here to show the portion that fructifies in this life, and a portion that remains, to demonstrate this. At the end of life, this prarabdha karma is 100% exhausted. A portion of the agami karma is exhausted, and a portion of the agami karmas remain unfructified at the end of this life. And what happens to them? They return to this infinite store of Sanchita. And then, having finished one life, then what happens next? The next batch of prarabdha karmas come. So this represents then the next life, the succeeding life. So this is a summary of what we've seen, of what Markandeya has taught about the doctrine of karma. And a couple of observations. We introduced a nice metaphor. Let's just see that metaphor briefly. So we said that this is the Sanchita karma is like your refrigerator. You have lots of leftovers served. In fact, from an infinite number of prior meals, you have an infinite amount of food stored in your refrigerator. It's a metaphor, right? Okay. So, and then, from this infinite amount of food in your refrigerator, you want to serve a meal. What do? You take a portion of the food out of this refrigerator for a given meal. That portion that you take out is the prarabdha karma. Now, depending on your mood, in addition to taking food out of the refrigerator, you may also cook something new. So your meal is partially what came out of your refrigerator and partially what you have newly cooked. That represents the agami karmas. Then your meal comes to an end, life comes to an end, and whatever you took out of the refrigerator, you have eaten all of that food. And whatever you have newly cooked, you have eaten a portion of that food. And then you're like, this is good, it works. I've never used this before. I'm pleased. It works too well, because look at this. You eat a portion of your newly cooked food. A portion of your newly cooked food is left over. What happens to it? It goes back in your refrigerator. So, really speaking, this is the doctrine of karma, how karma is understood from lifetime to lifetime, and this is the pattern that plays out life after life after life. Okay, there's much, much more we could say about it, but this is just to summarize what we've seen so far in our classes so that we can understand the remaining portion of this chapter. So remember that this dialogue between Markandeya and Yudhishthira about karma began because Yudhishthira was confused by the apparent unfairness of his karmic unfoldment, of the way karma was fructifying in his life. What he said at the opening of the chapter, many of you will remember, Yudhishthira complained to Markandeya. He said, I have lived a life of doing only good karmas, and here I am, exiled to the forest. Yudhishthira and his brothers only do bad karmas, and they're living it up in the palace. How fair is that? This is his complaint, and let's see Markandeya's response to this, and then we'll also see it up here on the board to understand how does this doctrine of karma answer that complaint, that life seems unfair. A lot of people say that, right? A lot of people complain, life seems unfair. If you understand the doctrine of karma properly, you'll see that there's absolutely nothing unfair in life. We'll see that as we proceed. Okay. So, with that in mind, there are plenty of seats up front if you'd like to sit. Please come and be seated where you can see properly. Okay, so let's pick up the thread where we left off. Iha vaikasya na mutra, iha vaikasya na amutraikasya no iha amutraikasya, iha cha mutra chaikasya, iha cha mutra na mutraikasya no iha. So here Markandeya is explaining what happens from life to life as this prarabdha unfolds. He says, ekasya, for someone, iha, here in this lifetime, for one person, and this, by the way, this verse is like a sutra. Sutra means something very, very terse. And something that's very terse, we have to supply some extra words to make sense out of it. Here the context is, when do you get happiness? And that's what Yudhishthira's complaint is. He says, when do I get happiness? Here I am, exiled to the forest. In spite of doing all my good karmas, I'm exiled to the forest. When do I get good karmas? When do I get happiness? Markandeya replies, ekasya, for one person may get happiness, that's what we have to supply. One person might get happiness, iha, here in this life, na amutra, and not in the next life. One person might get happiness in this life and not in the next life. In the second line, asya, ekasya, another person, amutra. Another person might get happiness in the next life, no iha, na u iha, and not in this life. The first person gets happiness in this life and not in the next. The second person gets happiness in the next life and not in this life. Then there's a third person. The third person in the third line, ekasya, another person, ihacha amutracha. Another person will get happiness in this life and in the next life. And then the fourth person in the last line, ekasya, another person, na amutra, will not get happiness in the next life, na u iha, nor in this life. 4 options. When do you get happiness? The 4 people and 4 options. So you might get happiness now, which means in this life, and not later, in the next life. Or you might get happiness not now, but you might get happiness later in your next life. Or you might get happiness now and later. Or you might get happiness not now in this life, nor later. Any other possibilities? I don't think so. Exhausted all these possibilities. Now, this is a whole lot of information in one short verse. That's what I refer to as sutra style. There's a set of literature in our tradition called sutras, and sutras express everything very, very tersely, like this verse. Sutras you have to read with a commentary. Without a commentary, you can't make any sense out of the sutra. Here, this verse is like a sutra coming from Markandeya. It's very terse and hard to understand. So he himself explains in the next verses. In fact, in the next 4 verses, he's going to take up each of these possibilities so that we can understand. So this verse is an introduction. Now he explains in the next 4 verses. First case he talks about, excuse me, is someone who gets happiness due to their karma. Someone who gets happiness now and not in the next life. Also, the meter changes here. It's a longer meter. Listen and repeat. Yes. Dhanani yesham vipulani santi, dhanani yesham vipula, nityam ramante suvibhushitangaha, nityam ramante Teshamayam shatruvaragna loko, Teshamayam shatruvaragna, Nasau sada deha sukhe ratanam, Nasau sada deha. So he says, there are yesham, those for whom dhanani vipulani santi, those who possess abundant wealth. Vipulani, abundant, dhanani, wealth. Those who who possess abundant wealth, who are they? They are suvibhushita angaha. They are those whose angas, whose limbs, are suvibhushita. Vibhushita, ornamented. Suvibhushita, well ornamented. Which means, not just one, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then we got one up here and one up here. Then you get these also here. On all of these, you got, and more here. We're not done. We got these. And of course these. And of course nowadays in America, you here and here. Sorry. This is suvibhushita angaha, those whose limbs are well ornamented. What about them? Nityam ramante. They always delight. They revel continuously. Shatruvaragna, O Yudhishthira, O killer of enemies. Shatruvaragna, O Yudhishthira, yesham, for those people who have all the ornaments and all the delights and wealth of this life, yesham, for them, ayam lokaha, they enjoy their happiness in this life. Ayam lokaha. This life is the time when they enjoy their happiness. Sada deha sukhe ratanam. Ratanam, for those who are reveling sada, continually, deha sukhe, in the pleasures of the body. That's what it says. So for those who revel continually in the pleasures of the body, they get their happiness in this life. Na asau, and not later, not in the next life. You live it up today, and next life, we don't, he says, they will not gain happiness. It's a little bit like the attitude of a hedonist, someone who spends all their money today to be as happy as they can today without worrying about tomorrow. So tomorrow they don't have any money, so tomorrow they suffer. This is the first of the 4 groups. Those And the point is that those who are living it up in this life, they may indeed suffer tremendously in the next life, as one of 4 possibilities. But there are 3 other possibilities. The next of those three other possibilities, ye yoga yuktas tapasi prasaktaha, ye yoga yuktas tapasi swadhyaya shila charayanti dehan, swadhyaya shila charayanti jitendriya bhutahite nivishtas, jitendriya bhutahite vishas tesham saunayam arignalokaha, tesham saunayam arignalokaha. So the second category, those who enjoy happiness not now in this life, but in their later life. How does Markandeya describe those people? Yea, those who are prasaktaha, engaged. Engaged in what? They are yoga yuktaha, they're engaged in yoga. Tapasi prasaktaha, they're engaged in various kinds of spiritual austerities. So those who are engaged in yoga and those who are engaged in austerities. By the way, yoga doesn't mean like we think of yoga in modern times, in a modern American yoga studio. So that's not at all how the ancient rishis envisioned. In fact, for them, yoga was meditation. In ancient times, yoga meant meditation. To practice yoga meant to meditate. So those who are devoted to meditation and to spiritual austerities, what else are they engaged in? Swadhyaya shilaha. They're also engaged in swadhyaya, spiritual studies. And what do? Jarayanti dehan. The literal meaning is they wear out their bodies, but the implied meaning is they spend their lives. Literally means they wear out their bodies, but in context, they spend their lives engaged in meditation, engaged in spiritual austerities, engaged in study. They are jitendriyaha, they are self-controlled, they are bhutahite vinishtaha, they're engaged in helping others. So we're talking about people who are living a very narrowly spiritual life, yoga, meditation, fasting, etc., different kinds of penances. They are Jitendriya means self-controlled, means they don't run to the refrigerator and look for their favorite foods, and they're dedicated to helping others. So we're talking about someone who lives an extremely austere life. To live an extremely austere life means not much happiness in this life, but living that austere life creates a tremendous amount of punya karma, which can bless you in the next life, which is what Markandeya concludes. Tesham, for some such people who live an extremely austere life, asau na ayam arendra lokaha. Arendra, O killer of enemies, Yudhishthira, for such people, Tesham, asau, their happiness will come in the next life. Na ayam lokaha, and not in this life. We call this delayed gratification. And psychologists use that kind of language. So the first category, they live it up in this life, and they suffer in the next. The second group of people, they live a very pious, austere life in this life, which means they don't enjoy much happiness now, but their austerities will certainly pay off in the next life. This is the second of the three options. What is the third? Third means, what does it say on the board? You enjoy now, you get happiness now, and you get happiness in the next life. Hey, that sounds a little bit better. How does that work? He explains. Ye dharmameva pratamam charanti. Ye dharmameva pratamam dharmena labdva chadhanani kale. Dharmena labdva chadhanani dharanavapya kratubhir yajante. Dharanavapya kratubhir yajante. Teshamayam chaiva paraschalokaha. Teshamayam chaiva. So the third group, those who gain happiness both in this life and in the next life, yea, those who pratamam, first of all, charanti dharmam eva, they always follow dharma. Pratamam, first and foremost, they follow dharma. And dhanena, by means of dharma, by following dharmic means, labdvacha dhanani, they gain wealth, dharmena, following righteous means. Kale, in this life, following dharma, they accumulate wealth. And the first group didn't say how they got that wealth. We don't know. But here, in this third group, he's saying, these people, first and foremost, practice dharma, and through their practice of dharma, through righteous means, they accumulate wealth. Not only wealth, but dharan avapya, they gain wives. By the way, it's in plurals. Not that one person gains many wives, but many people gain many wives. Dharan avapya. And kratubihi yajante. Not only are they focused on worldly goals like wealth and family, but kratubihi yajante, they perform rituals. The performance of rituals is for the sake of accumulating punya karmas which will most likely help you in the later life. So in this way, tesham, such people, ayam lokaha, they gain happiness in this life, parahacha, and in the next life. They gain happiness in this life because they've accumulated wealth, but they've accumulated wealth through dharmic means, so they gain happiness in the next life as well. This is the third of the four possibilities. Now we come to the fourth group. Fourth group is looking pretty grim. They get neither happiness in this life nor in the next life. Markandeya explains. Ye naiva vidyam na tapo na danam. Ye naiva vidyam na pato na chapi mudha prajane yajante. Na chapi mudha prajane. Na chadi gachanti sukhanya bhagyas. Na chadi gachanti sukhan. Tesham hayam chaiva parascha nasti. Tesham hayam chaiva parascha nasti. Yecha, and there's another group who, you have to look in the end of the second line. Ye yatante, those who strive. Ye yatante, those who strive. What do they strive? Na eva vidyam, they strive not for vidya, for knowledge. They don't strive for vidya, knowledge. Na tapaha, nor do they strive to do any tapas, any spiritual austerities. Na dhanam, nor do they give any charity. Nacha prajane, nor do they have families, nor do they get married and raise a family. These are all the means of gaining good things in this life and the next. Notice for vidya, tapas and dana are performed for happiness in the next life. Vidya and prajana means progeny, family. Family will gain you happiness in this life. So those activities that could gain you happiness in this life and in the next life, such people who fail to pursue those, what about them? Those people here are called, in the end of the third line, abhagyaha. They are miserable, unfortunate people. Abhagyaha. What about those miserable, unfortunate people? Na adhigachanti sukhani. They do not gain happiness. Tesham, for them there is no happiness. Ayam, in this life. Parahacha, and in the next life. Nasti, there is no happiness for them in this life or the next life. So what Markandeya has laid out is these 4 possibilities of what can happen in a given life. What he's describing is this prarabdha. What he says is that this prarabdha, 4 possibilities. The prarabdha could be could be mostly punya, not much papa. Actually, this doesn't work. I'm going to set that aside. This explanation doesn't exactly fit this prarabdha, because he's talking about our actions in this life. He's kind of talking about a combination of prarabdha and agami. So instead of explaining by means of this chart, let's just stay with the verses and understand what is he teaching Yudhishthira. He says that what happens in life can be any one of these 4 possibilities, depending on us. So in the first case, he's talking about people who either inherited a lot of wealth or by unjust means accumulated a lot of wealth. So they live it up in this life, but they don't do any good karmas in this life, so they don't build up any punya, which will help them in the next life. That's the first category. The second category are those very pious, austere people. They hold off on pleasure in this life, but they accumulate so much punya, they can have a wonderful life in the next. Then the third group are those who pursue both happiness in this life and happiness in the next life. How? By living a life of dharma and by accumulating wealth through dharmic means. They both gain pleasure in this life and in the next life. And the fourth group, in American English, we call them losers. They're just useless people. They don't make any effort at all for happiness, and they just suffer. Now, this is, by the way, this is the last verse of the chapter. This is Markandeya's response to Yudhishthira's question about life's apparent unfairness. Now, it turns out Markandeya doesn't really explain in much detail. He merely gives these 4 possibilities to Yudhishthira, knowing that Yudhishthira is smart enough to figure out which category he falls into. Yudhishthira is smart enough to figure it out. Are we? Which of these 4 categories will you put Yudhishthira in? So right now, he's suffering miserably in the forest, so he's certainly not part of category 1. But while he's in the forest, he is continuing to be engaged in prayer, in meditation, and how about, what is he doing right now? Satsanga, he is having a dialogue with a holy man, Markandeya. So since he's suffering in this life, but he's engaged in good deeds, that kicks him out of the 4th category, right? So he's not part of the 4th category because he's doing good deeds in this life. Then you might think, oh, he must belong in the 2nd category. 2nd category. 2nd category, remember, those who are living austere lives in this life for the sake of having a better next life. That's not so. And in order to know that Yudhishthira doesn't belong to that 2nd category, you have to read to the end of the Mahabharata, 84,000 verses, because after the war, Yudhishthira reclaims his kingdom and the palace And he has a wonderful life for many, many years before he finally retires. So Yudhishthira, even though he's going through a tough time now in life, later he will have all the glories and pleasures of the palace. He just has to wait. So therefore, Yudhishthira doesn't belong in the second category, where he's going to suffer in this life and enjoy in the next life. Truly speaking, Yudhishthira belongs in that third category. The third category means he's going to have a great life in this life, and he's going to have a great life in the next life because of his accumulated good karmas. Of course, at the moment he's suffering, and he's going to suffer for a lot of moments. How many moments? 12 years he's going to spend in that forest. A lot of suffering, but 12 years is finite, right? And after those 12 years of and plus one, and then comes a battle, then eventually he makes it back to his palace, and he has a wonderful life. This is the consolation given by Markandeya to Yudhishthira. He complains that my life seems unfair, and now we have to kind of interpolate. We have to put a lot of more explanation in. Looks like Markandeya, at least here in this chapter, is a man of very few words. So we have to fill in between the lines. And the consolation to Yudhishthira is this: if things are going badly today, just wait. Things will be better in the future. This is a very important principle of karma. Let me turn it into a more general principle. We said that the usual human condition is that we're born with more or less 50% punya, 50% papa. That means half of the time in life, things are going to go better than we expect. Half of the time in life, things are going to go worse than we expect. For a given amount of effort, things will sometimes go better than we expect, sometimes go worse than we expect. This is the effect of our prarabdha karma. Now, suppose you're going through a really hard time, like Yudhishthira is going through a really hard time, and suppose you complain, like Yudhishthira complains. Suppose you come and see me and say, Swamiji, everything's going wrong. I lost my job. I've got this health problem. This is going wrong. That's going. All of these problems, you complain to me. And my role, like Markandeya, will be to encourage you by helping you to understand the doctrine of karma better. Here's a nice observation. If you're going through a really, really tough time, you're exhausting a lot of papa karma, are you not? If you're going through a really tough time, this 50% papa karma is getting reduced. 40%, 30%, 20%. Because you're exhausting it. Which means what lies ahead for you is comparatively much more punya karmas. This is a fact of life, and you've seen it in your life, you've seen it in the life of others. And it works both ways. Sometimes things go too well for people. Like they're kind of lazy and negligent, but things are really going their way. How long does that last? For a while. Sooner or later, their luck, if we can call it that, their luck runs out. Specifically, sooner or later, their punya karma in this life runs out, and then things get tough. You've seen that happen in some people's lives, where in spite of their laziness and bad attitude, things go really well for them for a while. When they exhaust their punya karmas, then they are left with the remainder of all their papa karmas, and they suffer. Contrary-wise. And this is where the consolation to Yudhishthira comes. This is where the consolation to all of us comes. When we're going through a really tough time, two things we should know. One is we're exhausting our papa karmas. Second is, once you're exhausted, They're gone. We don't have to deal with it again. What lies ahead is better. This is based on statistics. You have a finite amount of good and bad karma in this life. You follow the math? So if you have, instead of using percentages, let's use, somebody once made up the expression, you get punya points and papa points. I don't like some kind of game. So suppose you're born with 100 punya points and 100 papa points. So someone who's very negligent in life and is using up all their punya points early in life. So if they use up 80 of their 100 punya points, now they've only got 20 punya points left. And how many papa points are left? 100. That's what they have to look forward to. Contrary-wise, Yudhishthira's situation right now in the forest, undergoing all that suffering, he's exhausting his papa points, so he's getting rid of 80 of the 100 papa points, which means only 20 remain, and 100 punya points are ahead for him. So the message of consolation is, if things are going bad, there's a condition here. If things are going badly in your life, and here's a condition, and you are doing good deeds. That's an important condition. If things are going badly in life, and you are doing good deeds, you can be guaranteed that things will get better. That's it. If things are bad in life and you're doing good things, things will get better. Contrary-wise, if things are going good in life and you're doing bad deeds, guaranteed things will get worse. So this is the doctrine of karma. This is the consolation to Yudhishthira on the unfairness of life. If we look at things very narrowly, we can't make sense. This is true for all of us, right? If we look at our lives through a very narrow perspective, what's happening this month, what's happening this year, we lose perspective. If we really want to understand our lives and see the fairness and appropriateness of karma as it unfolds, we have to look at the breadth of our life, from birth to our present age, and even to project towards the end of our life. If we get the really big picture, we can understand. And if you understand the doctrine of karma properly, no one can say life seems unfair. When the doctrine of karma is understood properly, you see the perfection of the unfoldment of karma. And that brings us to the end of this chapter, and then it leads us to the next chapter, which is also a continued dialogue with Markandeya. So in this Aranya Parva, notice how long it is, 299 chapters. Why is it so long? As we explained before, they're in that forest for 12 years. A lot of things happen in 12 years, including the fact that they meet a great many holy men, including Markandeya. Markandeya is one of the more important figures that they meet in the forest, and accordingly, there's actually about 50 chapters devoted to their dialogue with Markandeya. We're seeing just a few of those chapters. We just finished a couple of them, and we're going to see 2 more chapters. In fact, we're going to see another after this. There's even more. Some very important Vedantic teachings following this. This chapter, or these 2 chapters that I've chosen, are not dealing so much with Vedanta, but we just talked a moment ago about perspective. If we only look at our lives from the standpoint of what's happening today, or this week, or this month, or even this year, we don't get proper perspective. Well, turns out Markandeya has an amazing perspective. Why does Markandeya have an amazing perspective? Remember, when we started the previous section, he is a Chittaranjan. Who is a Chittaranjan? Someone who lives a long time. What is a long time? Not measured in years. Not measured in years. Measured in yugas. you wonder, how can, yugas means hundreds of thousands and millions of years. How can anyone live for hundreds of thousands and millions of years? I have no idea. But this is the story. Remember, this is a story being told to us by Vyasa. So whether Markandeya is a historical being who lived millions of years or not, I don't know. But what we do know is that Vyasa is telling us a story about Markandeya, who is said to have lived for millions and millions of years. And living for all of these yugas, Markandeya has a unique distinction of being alive at the end of the prior cycle of creation. A cycle of creation, in Sanskrit we call it kalpa. Kalpa means cycle of creation. We understand that the universe goes through cycles. What is a cycle? The universe is created, the universe exists for a length of time, then the universe goes through a process we call dissolution, pralaya. After pralaya, the universe is in a resolved condition, an unmanifest condition for a length of time. Then eventually the next cycle of creation begins, the next kalpa begins. There's a similar theory in modern physics, although it's debatable. We do know that this universe in which we live began with a big bang some 14 billion years ago. The question is, what happened before that big bang? We don't know. Scientists don't know. But it's possible that the prior universe collapsed and the collapse of the prior universe gave rise to the explosion of the present universe. We don't know, but it's a possibility. So you can imagine there was a universe before this one. That universe reached the end of its lifetime, so to speak. That universe collapsed onto itself. And after having collapsed, then came the Big Bang 14 billion years ago. We have a new universe, the next cycle of creation. Again, we call a cycle of creation kalpa. A kalpa begins with srishti, creation, and ends with pralaya, dissolution. So after srishti, the universe exists. The universe ends with pralaya, dissolution. In the mythology that we find in the Puranas, especially the Bhagavata Purana, this is described by Brahmaji. Brahmaji, we understand Ishvara as creator. The idea is that Brahmaji wakes up, and when he wakes up, the universe is born. Then, Brahmaji is awake all day long, but one of his days, not one of our days, a day in the life of Brahma is how long? One kalpa, one cycle of creation. Because when Brahmaji finally sleeps at night, he closes his eyes, and creation comes to an end. This is pralaya, this is dissolution. So each kalpa, each cycle of creation is a day and night in the life of Brahmaji. He wakes up, creation is on, srishti. He goes to sleep, creation goes into a state of dissolution, pralaya. And Markandeya is unique among living beings in that he lived through the end of one creation and the beginning of the next. How rare is that, according to this story? By the way, he himself is telling us this story, so we can't judge his authenticity. He's telling us the story. He said, and we'll see, he's going to describe to Yudhishthira what he witnessed. Markandeya witnesses first pralaya, the end of the prior cosmos, the end of the prior universe. Then he witnesses, during pralaya, he witnesses the state of dissolution. after Pralaya, he witnesses the beginning of the next creation. This is told in a delightful story. The purpose of the story, let's be very clear, the purpose of the story is to give us this big picture. And to get the big picture, to get a big picture on your life is useful, no doubt. Well, why not to get a big picture on this cosmos in which we live? That's the purpose of the story. A final comment before we begin the story is it's so significant when we talk about creation stories. We're going to get Markandeya's description of how creation began, and it's pretty wild, pretty strange. It's interesting. You'll find it fascinating. But what's interesting is how Markandeya describes the process of creation is different from how Narada Muni describes creation, is different from how other rishis. Every rishi seems to have a different story for how creation began. If you have 20 rishis, you have 20 different creation stories. I'm not joking. You go through the Puranas. Most of these stories are found in Puranas. A little bit in Upanishads and some other places you can find them as well. But look at, what does that tell us? If 20 different rishis describe the process of creation in 20 different ways, then we ask, well, wait a minute, which of those 20 ways is right? Do you see the problem with the question? So if 20 rishis describe the process of creation in 20 different ways, what is the take-home message? These are creation stories. And a story is meant to teach us something. A story is not like a chapter in a history book. A chapter in a history book tells us about historical events exactly as they happen, but a story is not history. A story is told not to record historical events. A story is told to teach us. And in this case, to teach us the big picture of creation and dissolution. Just to contrast with the Bible, the Old Testament of the Bible, which says that God created the world in 6 days, and then on the 7th day he rested. Here's an interesting observation. There is one creation story in the Bible. He created in 6 days and rested on the 7th. Since there's only one story, there's more of a tendency to take a story not as a story, but as a historical fact. Should we take that as a historical fact? God labored hard for 6 days. Puja Swami Tadatmananda used to make he would lay into this, I have to say. He said, Bhagavan ne thak gaya. He would say that. He says God got tired. After 6 days of hard work, he got tired, and so therefore he had to rest and relax. It's absurd, right? But since there's only one creation story in the Bible, there's a tendency for many people to take it as a historical account and not as a story. It's a story. We know it's a story. The 6 days. It's a story. The story means it's full of symbolism that teaches us something. Here, we don't have that problem. We don't have one creation story. We have dozens of creation stories. They're all different, which means none of them are historical accounts. All of them are symbolic, and they are meant to teach us something. So with that introduction, let us see Markandeya's account of Pralaya and Srishti. Vaishampayano vacha Vaishampayana Tata sapunarevata Tata sapunar Markandeyam yashasvinam Markandeyam Papracha vinayo peto Papracha vinayo Dharmarajo Yudhishthira. Dharmarajo Yudhishthira. Vaishampayana, of course, is the narrator. So the narrator, Vaishampayana, Uvacha, what did he say? Tataha, at some later time, Saha referring to Yudhishthira, Punaha eva, ata, then, Markandeyam yashasvinam prapacha. Saha, look at the last line. So Saha Dharmarajaha Yudhishthiraha. So he, Yudhishthira, who was Dharmaraja, what did Yudhishthira do? Look, third line. Papracha, he asked. Who asked? Yudhishthira, who was Vinaya Upetaha. Yudhishthira, who was endowed with humility. Vinaya Upetaha Yudhishthira being endowed with humility. Papracha, he asked. Who did he ask? Markandeyam, who was Yashasvanam, that famous Markandeya. Yudhishthira asked with humility, approaching a great man, a saintly man. Yudhishthira asked with great humility. What did he ask? Yudhishthira vacha, Yudhishthira Naike yuga sahasrantas, Naike yuga sahasra, Tvaya drishta mahamune, Tvaya drishta mahamune. Nachapi hasamah kaschata, Nachapi hasamah Ayusha tava vidyate, Ayusha tava vidyate. He says, Naike yuga sahasrantaha. Yuga sahasra, thousands of yugas. Many yugas make one kalpa, one cycle of creation. So he says, Eke yuga sahasrantaha. Many thousands of yugas are drishta, were seen, tvaya, by you. Mahamune, O great sage, O Markandeya, many thousands and thousands of yugas, eons were seen by you, and iha, here in the world, na api samaha kashit, there is no one like you. No one like you, Markandeya. Ayusha tava vidyate. No one has the same amount of life, Ayush. No one has the same length of life as you do, Markandeya. Yudhishthira observes, as we said before, Markandeya is unique to have lived through and witnessed the end of one kalpa and the beginning of the next. And somehow Yudhishthira knows this fact. I guess Markandeya being so famous, this information has come to Yudhishthira. He knows it. Yudhishthira continues. Pralaye chapi nirvritte, pralaye chapi prabuddhe chapitamahe, prabuddhe chapit tvameva srijyamanani, tvameva srijyam bhutaniha prapashyati, bhutaniha prapashyati. Pralaye nirvritte. When pralaya came to its end, when pralaya, meaning the state of dissolution of the prior universe, when the prior dissolved universe, when pralaye nirvrate, when that period of dissolution came to an end. There's a better translation. When that period of dissolution came to an end, when does that happen? Prabuddhecha pitamahe. Pitamaha, grandfather here, refers to Brahmaji. Not anyone's grandfather. Here Pitamaha means Brahmaji. So when Brahmaji prabuddhe, when he woke up, a reference to the Puranic story, Brahmaji sleeps, pralaya, Brahmaji wakes up, srishti. So when the last cycle when the last period of dissolution came to an end, when Brahmaji woke up, then Tvam eva, you indeed, Markandeya, you prapashyasi, you saw. What did you see? Srajamanani bhutani iha. Here in this world, you saw bhutani, all creatures, srajamanani, being created. So he had that unique status. He existed when this cycle of creation came into existence. That would be the equivalent, by the way, to look through the lens of science, of somebody observing the Big Bang. That's the equivalent. So Markandeya witnessed the beginning of the new cycle of creation. That would be the equivalent of somebody witnessing the Big Bang. Yudhishthira continues, Etat pratyakshata sarvam, etat pratyakshata purva vrittam dvajotama, purva vrittam dvajotama, tasmadit chamahe shrotum, tasmadit chamahe, sarva hetvatmikam katam, sarva hetvatmikam. Etat sarvam, all of that, the process of creation, all of that, purva vrittam, which happened so long ago at the beginning of this cycle of creation, all of that, pratyakshataha, all of that you saw directly, Dvajotama, or best of rishis, you saw all of that take place at the beginning of the cycle of creation. You saw that directly. You witnessed all of that. Tasmat, therefore, ichamahe, we want, shrotam, we want to hear about. What do we want to hear about? Sarva hetvatmikam katam. We want to hear katam, the story. What kind of story? Sarva hetu atmikam. The story of Sarva hetu, the story of the source of everything, the beginning of everything, the cause for everything. He says, we want to hear the story of the beginning of the cycle of creation. And of course, there's only one person you could ask that of, and a person who actually witnessed creation, and that is Markandeya. So Yudhishthira asked Markandeya. Markandeya replies, Markandeya uvacha, Markandeya uvacha, hanta te katayashyami, hanta te katayashyami, namaskritva swayambhuve, namaskritva purushaya puranaya, purushaya puranaya, shashvataya vyayaya cha, shashvataya. Hanta, O dear one, te, unto you, katayashyami, I will tell you this. You asked to hear about the origin of the universe. You want to hear about the beginning of this kalpa, this cycle of creation. Katayashyami, I will tell you. I'll tell you in a moment. But first, he says, namaskritya, first having saluted, having bowed to whom? Purushaya Puranaya, having bowed to that most ancient being. What being? Swayambhuve, the one who is self-existent, who is at Shashvataya, unto the eternal one, Avyayayacha, and unchanging. So after praying to that eternal, unchanging, unborn, uncreated, self-existent being, only then will I tell you the answer about how creation began. Notice Markandeya here is not praying to Brahma or Vishnu or Shiva or any particular deity. This is a prayer to Ishvara. Ishvara, the God of the cosmos, not a particular form of God, not a particular aspect of God, but God in general, Ishvara. So having worshipped Ishvara, then Markandeya begins his story. And since the story will, actually I'm looking at the clock, this would be a good place to stop. We'll begin his story with the next class, and we'll go quickly through the verses, because what we're after is to get that big picture. And I have to tell you, the story is startling. You'll be amazed by the story, and it really gives us that big picture in a delightful way. We'll have some fun. We all enjoy a story. This is a great story. We'll all enjoy it. All right. Some closing announcements. Tomorrow, Sunday, we'll have our satsang question-answer session at 6:15. If the weather's nice, hopefully we'll sit outside. That would be nice. Several weeks ago, our volunteers started washing the walls, and they did a pretty good job and got pretty far. There's some more work to be done. Washing walls, very easy work. We could use at least 12 volunteers if you're free to stay back after class. So please stay back. You can help wash the walls. They have some cleaning materials. You'll be guided as to what needs to be done. That would be a great help. Thank you. Also, they have a nice lunch to give you after you've finished washing the walls. And then library will be open after class, and we'll conclude with our prayers. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayah Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.